What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of At Home with Mark, season 5, episode 16. And this is an episode that is a long time coming. This man here, Scott Baxendale, brought my grandfather's super old 1939 Harmony Vogue back to life, and it means so much to me. And we've been talking about doing this for months. I think I shipped you that guitar back in May, Scott.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. So thanks so much for doing this, man. I'm so excited.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, man.
You're lucky to get it back so fast.
I know you. Ever since the company kind of changed and you kind of joined up with Stay Gold, you guys have been really backed up, huh? With a lot of work.
Yeah, and when I was in Georgia, I had like a 6-man crew. Now I'm down to me and 2 guys that I'm training right now. So it's really kind of up to me to build everything at this point.
Man, that's crazy. Yeah. Well, we're gonna get into all the juicy bits of that. I want to ask you though, because I asked this of everybody. What is your earliest musical memory?
Oh, this is a good one. Okay, so my dad was a pilot for TWA, and I was born in 1954, and this happened in 1960. So I was 6 years old, and my parents went out to. They met a guy. My dad met a guy while he was flying. His name was Gary Civils, and put a pin in that name because it'll come back in a minute. Right. But Gary Civils was a jazz trumpet player who he was the band leader of the Kansas City Playboy Club in the early 60s. And back in the 60s, that was the biggest club gig in the city, was playing jazz at the Playboy Club. And he was a jazz trumpet player. And so my parents left me and my brother with a babysitter and went out that night to go see Gary Civils perform. And for some reason, and I can tell you the reason, my dad was drunk. He brought Gary Civils and a few other musicians for an after hours jam after the gig was over. So at like 3 o'clock in the morning jam while they were drinking and playing. And so I was awakened by this sound and this music. And I, even at 6 years old, I was aware that the presence of this sound did not match up with the little record player that we had in our living room that played records. It was just had too much presence and too much, volume and everything. And so it woke me up. I went to the front, I went to the top of the stairs, and I watched for the next 2 hours to watch them have a jam session. And later, Gary Civils, when I was 13 years old, my parents went out to see Gary Civils again. And they came back and were raving about this 13-year-old guitar player that was playing with Gary Civils, who was the same age as me, and that turned out to be Pat Metheny.
Oh my God!
And so Gary Civils got Pat Metheny his start right before he played with Gary Burton. So anyway, when I was 6 years old, I sat mesmerized looking down the stairs at these jazz guys playing music, and that changed my life. I mean that I can pinpoint the moment when I became a luthier to that exact moment, or musician to that exact moment. Then flash forward to 1964, the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan. Within 24 hours of the Beatles playing on Ed Sullivan, me and some kids from school started our own band, not knowing how to play any instruments at all. But you could buy a Beatle wig, you could buy Beatle boots, and Beatles had all kinds of merch and stuff going on. So we bought Beatle wigs and we bought Beatle boots. And then for just some reason, my dad had a workshop in the garage. I went out and made 4 prop guitars for us to hold while we pretended to be the Beatles nice. in the 4th grade. And so the other thing that was really popular at the time was the Disney movie, The Shaggy Dog, with Fred McMurray in it. And so we called ourselves the Shaggy Dogs, and some girl in our class who could draw cartoons took these white t-shirts and drew the Shaggy Dog cartoon caricature on the front. And we had these tight black jeans and our Beatle boots and our Beatle wigs. And I made these prop guitars. I put like poster board, and I glued like a 1x4 for the fingerboard neck. And then I used like my mom's yarn and buttons for the knobs. I painted these all up in bright colors and stuff. And I even made a left-handed one for Paul because he played the bass left-handed. So I made one backwards. And then we didn't know how to play, but we changed all the words for the Beatles songs to refer to dogs instead of girls, because in the 4th grade, we could care less about girls at that age. And so we loved our dogs. So So we worked up a little set of like 4 or 5 songs, and we sang "I Want to Hold Your Paw," and we sang we sang we sang "Last night I said these words to my dog, ruff 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 ruff," and so the principal came. The teacher called the principal to come down and see us, and so we did our little performance in the classroom, for my classroom. And the principal loved it so much that she had us go to every single classroom in the school and do our little set. So that was our
Oh
first.
man.
So we went on tour there. So we're on tour. So that's in 1964 when I did that. In 1974, 10 years later, I dropped out of college and went to work for Mossman Guitars because I wanted to build guitars for real.
Which leads me to my buddy Jeremy, the guitar hunter, when he wanted me to ask you about that. But before we go there, I want to ask you, because I'm a huge Beatles fan. So
All right.
I was exposed to the Beatles when I was probably in the 6th or 7th grade by my uncle, who is second or third husband of my aunt. And he's still around, but he put on that. Did you ever see that documentary, The Complete Beatles?
I think so. I'm not sure if I saw the whole thing. I mean, I have it all on
Oh.
DVD, but I'm not sure if I've seen all of it. But I've been through it.
Oh
You
man,
know, I
it's
think
so
I've been through all, and then I've come back and rewatched some of it.
yeah. That one like is what hooked me.
Uh-huh.
But like, I'm so curious because like my parents weren't into the Beatles. They were past, I think that age. They were kind of too old to kind of
Mine
be
too.
into it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And
They're from the
so
Frank Sinatra era.
yes, yeah,
Yes. Right.
totally. So like born in the 30s, late 30s kind of thing.
Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin. That's who they loved. Yeah.
Rat Pack, yeah.
Yeah.
But like what was that time? Was it like that palpable in the United States when that happened? Like was it that like wildfire spreading kind of situation where everybody
Absolutely.
like,
I mean,
yeah.
the Beatles on Ed Sullivan were as big as 9/11 at the time it happened in terms of viewership and how much interest and people. I mean, it was a worldwide phenomenon.
Oh,
You know, they became household names in 1 second, or 1 5-minute spot on the Ed Sullivan Show. They were household names after that, and just and so it was huge. And of course, you didn't have the internet or anything, so you only had 3 channels, and so those 3 channels kind of dictated the shots. And when they put them on Ed Sullivan, it was just like explosion overnight. And from their point of view, though, it wasn't, because they'd been grinding it out in Hamburg for 5 years before that, or three years before that, or whatever.
yeah. Did
Yeah.
you was there hype about them that they were gonna be on Ed Sullivan, or like that people knew, or was it just like, what is this?
There was a little hype pre-show, I think. I mean, I was so little, I barely remember that, but all I know is we were all glued to the TV when it went on. So there had to have been some pre-hype. And I think "I Want to Hold Your Hand" was already on the radio. They'd been playing it.
Right.
And "She Loves You," they were playing those 2 songs on the radio.
Okay.
So they were already riding the crest of that popularity. So people knew from the radio. And so when they were on, I think it was the highest rated thing that had ever been on TV at the time, I think.
Man,
And so
it's crazy.
yeah.
It's so crazy. I feel like I was born in the wrong era sometimes, because I'm like so into all these old like kind of older bands and like the hippie era music,
Sure,
more than anything
sure.
that I've ever kind of been listening to. But like the Beatles, in terms of the impact on musical history, to me is so
Sure.
fascinating, And
Well,
like think about how short their career was and all the music that they released. It's like mind blowing.
Yeah. Their career wasn't that long.
No.
I mean, when you look at that compared to the Stones, I mean, the Stones are 10 times longer, in terms of their career. And yeah. But I was fortunate to be, I think that era, probably the reason why you're attracted to that era, the mid 60s to the mid 70s era, is because that was when it was all new. Up until then, like you said, you had the Rat Pack and you had Dean Martin, and and people were afraid of Chuck Berry and Little Richard, at first. And so that all influenced the Beatles, and then the Beatles made that palatable for the mainstream, that kind of music. And so it was a phenomenon, and then we got to go see those bands live, a lot of them. And so to see them in their prime, and also is before the music business was so corporatized, it wasn't Clear Channel running everything and all that. It was, there's a lot more independent stuff going on.
Right.
And a band could put together an independent unit and go from playing clubs to playing, being famous and being stars in a 6 month to a year time, where now, if you don't have 1 million people on TikTok or YouTube, it's like you're just going to beat your head against the wall. It seems like, just playing for the same size audience all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any bands or artists that you saw that you're like, oh man, I was so lucky to have seen? Like, did you ever see like Ray Charles live or?
I did see Ray Charles live. That was great.
Oh,
Yeah. I sat right next to Pat Paulson, who was a famous comedian on the Smothers Brothers show, who ran for president a couple times, and saw the Rayettes and Ray Charles. I did see that. I mean, I built a guitar for Carl Perkins, and I got to hang out with him and watch him play when he was in his like mid 50s. 57, I think, was when I met him. He was 57, and he put on the most intense 2.5 hour show I'd ever seen when I saw that. And so I got to see some pretty cool people, and
yeah.
it's really sad these last 2 or 3 years to really, since Prince died, it's really been sad from that point on, of all the people from our generation. It's just dropping like flies, and
Yeah.
and when you least expect it, too, like Tom Petty and Prince, both of them, and some of the others that we've lost. And and there's only 2 Beatles left, and the Rolling Stones are starting to drop away, and it's just like that whole generation of what they now call the legacy acts, is kind of almost beyond us.
Yeah, man. I mean, my wife and I this past June, Paul McCartney came through Baltimore and he played at Camden Yards, where the Orioles play.
Uh-huh.
And I have a friend who used to work for Paul, so she got me tickets.
Oh,
I
nice.
was thinking we were going to be in the nosebleeds or somewhere.
Uh-huh.
Eighth row
Oh,
center,
nice. That was
right in
great.
front of him. And I sent her champagne and all this stuff because we couldn't believe it. My wife and I still talk about it because we saw him at Fenway Park when I was going to Berkeley when he came through there back in 2008. He sounded just as good, man. He's still, you can hear it in his voice that it's not totally there, but
he can't hit those high notes anymore and do that high
yeah,
Little Richard stuff anymore, but he still got such energy and still could play great. And he's such a positive ambassador. You can't deny, it's really great to see him.
That's
Yeah.
gonna kill me though. When I get that news that he's no longer here, it's gonna
But
kill
look
me.
at Ringo. Ringo's like Dorian Gray of rock. I mean, he looks exactly the same now. He's in his 80s. He looks exactly like he did 30 years ago. And his energy is the same. And he's playing with all these incredible people, making all these killer albums at his house with like Ray Wiley Hubbard and Joe Walsh and all these people, and it's just like, he's like, I think somebody should do a story about him being the Dorian Gray of rock, because he looks exactly, he hasn't changed a bit in like 50 years.
Yeah. No, I think you might be onto something. Someone should check his house for anything that is covered with a large blanket. Let's put it that way. All right, well, let's move forward to Mossman. So you got to tell me about this. So I'm not hip to this. So Jeremy said ask him about it. So tell me all about it.
Well, Stuart Mossman started building guitars in the late 60s. And then by 1969, he'd started his little company in his garage. By 74, when I dropped out of college and went to work for them, he had built it up to 22 employees, and they're making about 4 guitars a day. So Stuart Mossman was one of just a very small handful of luthiers in the late 60s and early 70s that pioneered the boutique guitar industry that has blown up, and it's everywhere now. So you had Stu Mossman, you had Michael Gurian, you had Alo Prinzi, and you had maybe 1 or 2 other people that were taking, they were beyond hand makers, and they were starting these little small factories to mass produce guitars. And Stuart Mossman had this vision because in the late 60s and early 70s, and this can tie in with George Gruen as well, musicians were beginning to realize that the guitars made in the 30s were superior to what they were buying new at the guitar store now. And that's a direct result of the guitar boom that started in the late 50s, early 60s, that went all the way up to the disco era. And they call that era the guitar boom. And every guitar factory from 59 to 79, every year they had to exponentially increase their manufacturing, their product, how many units they were putting out every year. And Fender and Gibson and Martin, they were all like, the next year there was twice as many, and then 3 times as many, until they were making way more guitars than they were early on. And during that time, starting in 1960 to 1980, you saw a real decline in most companies in the quality, based on the idea that they were trying to make the guitars faster and put less hours into them. And Gibson did stuff like in 1958 when they came out with the adjustable bridge, and they marketed that as an improvement. But the reality was, it was only an improvement in that it took less labor to make that guitar. Right. Because instead of a guy hand fitting a bone saddle and adjusting it, they just had an adjustable screws, and the guy just screwed it. The guy setting the guitar up just screwed it till it was adjusted. And so they skipped a whole step in the manufacturing process by making it that way. And each little change that Gibson made, say starting in 58, 59, up to, into the 80s, each single change didn't really affect the overall quality that much. But when they compounded over 10 years, then what you ended up was a piece of crap compared to what was made earlier.
Yeah.
And, and that started with an adjustable bridge on their acoustic guitars. And then they put these thick pick guards. Instead of putting a nice tortoiseshell pick guard under the finish like the old ones had, they started slapping this big thick one right on top of the finish. That saved them some time, and they didn't have to worry about pick guard shrinkage and stuff. And just, just varying things. And I can go into detail about how they did their finishes and blah, blah, blah. But each company was trying to do that. So Stewart was counteractive to that, Stuart Mossman, when he was saying what he wanted to do was recreate a factory that mirrored what Martin was doing in 1934 when they reached their pinnacle in terms of acoustic guitars. And all Stuart Mossman made was dreadnought, like D28 style guitars.
Right.
And they had different trim levels, but they were all basically rosewood dreadnoughts. They made a mahogany dreadnought, but most of them were rosewood. And so Stuart was looking at the guitar from the 30s, and he was trying to figure out why they were so much better than what Martin was making in the 70s. And he came to the conclusion that it was the number of employees putting out a certain number of guitars to maintain a certain level of quality and certain sound and stuff. And so he wanted to try and recreate that, in which that was his goal. And so he was kind of the pioneer, and this was pre-CNC machine. We didn't use any, CNC machines didn't come out till, another 10, 20, 15 years after Stuart Mossman retired. And after I sold my interest in Mossman, it was when CNCs were just in the very cusp of starting to be used with guitars. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was Hartley Peavey that was the first guy to use a CNC machine to make a guitar.
Oh,
and
really?
The Peavey T60 and T40 and the T40 bass and the T15 they're collectible now. Those were the first CNC made guitars. And we couldn't believe how cheap they were when they first were selling them, because they were like a Tele was like $800 in 1979. A T60 was $235. And so they were trying to fit in the niche of in between the beginner, it's kind of the intermediate level. And and at first they weren't even considered professional level, but then a lot of pros started playing them because they were pretty decent guitars, and even though they're kind of heavy, but yeah. And so anyway, Stuart was trying to create that. And then, but what I learned more about that later when I went to Gruen in Nashville, and then I went back and bought Mossman, and I applied some of that to the guitars. And I think I was a lot closer. The guitars I built were a lot closer to sounding like the guitars from the 30s than what Stuart was making. And, right. Even though the guitar Stuart made sounded good too, they just have their own kind of a different sound.
Well, let me ask you this too. So at that time, if we're talking late 50s, early 60s, and we're talking acoustics and electrics, but electrics mostly, like Were those like bursts, like those Les Pauls, those PAF, early PAFs and stuff? Did
Mhm.
people really at the time know the value of what they had there? Or
No,
what
huh?
was it just like a $300 guitar? How much were those at the time?
When
Like,
I worked at George Gruen in 1978 to 1982, a Sunburst had gone from $2,000 to $4,000 in value. And when I was first working there, we bought PAF pickups for $50.
it's crazy.
And like I would, if I had a PAF pickup, I was feeling like I was making a killing to sell it for $50 to somebody
Wow.
at the time. And when I so in around 1975, when I was in college at KU, this is a funny story. So I took out a college loan at the University of Kansas in like 1972 or 73, and it was at 2% interest. And I used that money to buy a brand new ES335 and a giant PV amplifier that was a huge musician head on a stack speaker cabinet.
Nice.
And so I used that student loan money to buy that. And that was my first like really professional quality guitar that I had. And I had like a Teisco, and I've had like an Ventura and some cheap guitars before that, you know. But I never had a really like quality guitar, and that was the first one. And then I traded that 335, and I remember paying, I think, $375 for that 335 in 1973.
Man.
And then I traded it straight up in this music store in Kansas City for a 59 Strat that pretty much looked just like Stevie Ray Vaughan's 59 Strat. Because at the time, I thought the 335 was cheesy because everyone was playing them, and I still to this day don't like the 335s because I feel like they're kind of don't balance right. They're kind of butt heavy. You know, they
Mm.
kind of like the butt is too heavy on them or something. And I have it both. I have it like a vintage 335 and a 330. I like the 330 way better, and I play it way more because it's
Interesting.
more balanced, and it's weight wise, it's more balanced. And the neck, see, the neck joins the body on a 330 at like the 15th fret, and then the 335 joins it like the 19th fret or 17th fret or something. So the neck is farther north and the bridge is farther north on the body.
Hmm.
So like on a 330 and on most arch tops, the bridge is right where the points or the F holes are. And that's how you tell, like on a violin, where the intonation goes. It's the points on the F holes show you where to put the bridge. And that was supposed to be the same on arch top guitars, but a lot of builders have deviated off of that. And Gibson 330 is right on the money, and then the 330 moves all that north, but they left the F holes in the same spot. And it makes the whole guitar unbalanced to me.
Interesting.
And yeah, where the 330 just balances and it just feels great. And so the
That's so
330, the 335 is worth 5 times what the 330 is worth, and too, in terms of vintage guitar value.
right.
Yeah.
But do you still have that Strat?
No, I wish.
Oh
No.
man. So what was your first guitar? Like your actual first guitar?
My actual first guitar, ironically, was one of those little silver tone 3/4 Sunburst Stellas that we rebuild all the time in our shop now.
That's
And
got to
that
be
was my
pretty
very first
nostalgic.
guitar. It cost me $12. Then I saved up lawnmower money one summer. Me and my best friend, we mowed lawns for $5 a yard. And we saved up enough. We both went to Western Auto and bought matching Teisco electric guitars. And my first amp with that, I bought at Radio Shack, and it was a Valco amp. I really wish I still had that very first amp. It had this really nice little combo Valco amp, and I've never seen another one like it. It was just like a cube amp that was made, and the head was made by Valco, and it was a little tube amp with one 12-inch speaker in it. And I had that little Teisco, and that amp was my first thing that I played in my first band, which was called the Second Annual Conglomeration was the name of the band. Because you had the 1910 Fruit Gun Company, and you had, you know, bands like that are in the late 60s. And so we were and I drew this psychedelic head for the drum head and everything. It was really funny. And
Nice.
we played Gloria and Louie Louie and, you know, a little Latin Loopy Lou and get off of my cloud, and that was our set list.
Man, that's
House of Rising
awesome.
Sun. House of Rising Sun. We always played. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
See, this is why we get along, Scott. So let's kind of go back. So as far as building your own stuff, like, so you go to Mossman. Is that where you get most of your skill sets in terms of like lutherie? Like, were you like really kind of cutting your teeth there first, or were you doing it prior to that?
When I first went to Mossman, I was in the finish department, and so for the first like year, at least year, maybe 2 years, all I did was do the finish. And then I worked eventually into the final assembly department and setup department. So I did finish, I did buffing, and I did the setup and adjustment through my time in Mossman.
Mm-hmm.
And then and I had never, but I made it a point to go to every other department and pick their brains and figure out what they're doing and ask them what they're doing and pay attention to what they were doing, because I wanted to see everything going on. So I was really sort of, unlike some guys who come in the shop and have more of a narrow focus and just, they don't really look outside too much. I was always like, what are you doing? And what are you doing? And,
Right.
and how do you carve that neck like that? And what are you doing here? And so then later on, when I bought Mossman, I knew how to do all that stuff. And so when I set the factory up, when I bought the whole factory and moved it and set it all up, and then I knew how to do each of those operations. And by the time and in the meantime, I had built a few other guitars, so I also knew that as well.
Yeah.
And
So you have a couple guitars there that I want you to show that you built.
Okay.
And then we can segue into Baxendale and conversions and all that stuff. But I want you to show everybody, because like the guitars you showed me before we went on air are beautiful. So,
right on.
Whatever one you want to grab first.
Well, my first good guitar, so my first good acoustic guitar, I bought in like, I don't know, around not too long after the Strat in the early 70s. And I just stumbled on a Gibson J185 for sale in this music store for $235. It was a 55 Gibson J185. Today, that's a $20,000 guitar.
Man.
And I had no idea how to get $235, but it was in between my freshman and sophomore year, because I was just moving to a farmhouse in Lecompton, Kansas, outside of Lawrence, where it was like old hippie house in the country. And the hippies that lived there before us had grown a bunch of pot outside, and they'd chopped off the pot bushes, but since they'd left, they'd all bushed out again at the bottom of the stalks, just pot leaf. And so me and my brother went up and harvested all that, and we took it home while my parents were at work, and we tied it all up in a pillowcase and ran it through the tumble dryer for like 5 cycles and force dried it. And then me and my brother went out that night and sold it for like $2 an ounce or $5 an ounce or something like that. And I was able to make that $235 in like a day or so, and went back and bought that guitar.
I love that story.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's great.
Yeah, so we did the old tumble dry the weed.
And then you parlayed that into an instrument?
And I bought that. Yeah, I parlayed that into that 55 Gibson J185 guitar. So,
oh man,
when I was at Gruen's, I sold that, and they were becoming very collectible then by the late 70s. And at the time George sold it, it was the highest price ever paid for a J185, which was $1,500. And then to some guy in Japan. And then now those things were like I could never afford one. They're like 20 grand for a nice one. Man. And so I decided I was going to build my own tribute to that, because I went for my guitar. So usually I build guitars for other people, but this one I built for myself specifically. And so it's patterned after a Gibson J185 I had in some ways, like the body shape, and in some points the inlays. Yeah. And like the Maltese crosses on the bridge, that's from the J185. And you can see the Gibson style backwards bridge on it.
Yeah.
Where like a Martin bridge, this part's on this side of the bridge. So they call this the backwards bridge. And so it's got a backwards bridge with a through saddle like my old J195 had. But it's fancier in the sense that I made it out of this Bolivian rosewood instead of the curly maple that the 185 was made out of. And I did, yeah. And and because I was running my shop in Denver at the time when I built this. I did it all fancy just to kind of advertise my luthier work. Now I just like to make plain guitars. I don't really like to make these fancy trimmed ones anymore, but I made it in that regard. And so, like, instead of the double parallelograms that the Gibson has, like a SJ or a J185, I offset them and then made these other things to make them look like open books.
Oh man, that's so
Yeah.
cool.
So you see that, and that's like you see if I just took out that middle part and leveled off the two pearls on the other side, it'd be the same Gibson double parallelograms
That's
that
really
they
cool,
have.
man.
And so, and then of course I did, and so I've always called this little thing down here the whoop-de-doo. And so we put a whoop-de-doo on the end of it here, like a J200 instead of a J185. So it's
Cool, man.
So it's kind of like that. And then I did the fleur-de-lis and the headstock, and that's the logo. That's the logo I was using for a while in the 2000s, early 2000s.
Okay, man, that's beautiful, Scott.
And so when I finished this guitar, my friend called it the James Earl Jones of guitars. I don't know how it's coming through. I'm not hearing it in my headphones, so I'm not sure if you're getting it through.
Yeah, we can hear it a little bit. Yeah, it's got body for sure.
And so anyway, yeah, and so I let Luther Dickinson use it when he played guitar with the Black Crowes on one tour, and he started calling it Darth Vader. So we call this guitar Darth Vader now.
Nice, that's awesome.
So,
what
yeah.
year was he using that? When was that?
Oh, that was probably, I don't know, 2012 or 2013 or something like that.
So you could probably
2011.
find some video of him playing it, huh? Probably.
Yeah, well, he did a feature article in Acoustic Guitar where he has this guitar in it. So there's a lot of pictures of him with this guitar out there.
Yeah, dude.
And
I have to ask you about that too, and I have to give a huge shout out to my friend Adam Miller, because when I posted a picture of my grandfather's guitar when it was all trashed before you got it, the reason I heard about you is he's like, you should talk to this guy. He actually takes those things and makes them, brings them back to life and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God. And then when I went into like research and look you up and stuff, I saw how many of these amazing players that you've built things for, or you've refurbished. And tell people to give like 5 artists that you've, because you have a plethora, but like, has there been any interesting projects of like famous guitar players that have brought you stuff that you're like, whoa, this is crazy, I can't believe I'm working on this?
Well, when the reason I was able to get introduced to all these people was through my association with the Hard Rock Cafe. And so when I had after I had Mossman Guitars and moved it to Dallas, Texas, and I was working there, and then I somehow got hooked up with the Hard Rock Cafe, and they were looking for somebody who knew about guitars to help them build their giant guitar bar. And so I built the 2 guitar bars they had. One was a Stratocaster on the inside, a 34-foot long Strat, and then there was a Les Paul that was the bar out on the patio, a black Les Paul, like Black Beauty style Les Paul.
Right.
And so they commissioned me to build those. And my dad had a machine shop at the time, so he was able to machine out the knobs and the frets and all that stuff that we used on it. And there's pictures of that you can find online. But anyway, so I parlayed that into me working with the people who curated their collection. And so I became really good friends with Steve Ruthier, who was the guy in charge of procuring instruments. He would go to Sotheby's and buy instruments, and he was involved in distributing the instruments out to the different restaurants and all that stuff. And so I became sort of like the curator tech for the collection. And I would make these mounting things that went on the back of guitars, so they mount them up on the wall so they look like they're suspended off the wall. And each one of those had to be handmade and hand tailored for each individual model guitar to make that work. And basically it was an aluminum bracket that they took the strap buttons off, and then they put that where the strap buttons would go and screw in, and that bracket somehow made it to a wooden pad that would screw to the wall. And so they would screw that to the wall, and then they could just screw it into where the strap buttons were, and that was held the guitar and looked like it was just suspended out from the wall. And so I started building all those for them, and then I started taking care of their collection and working on their guitars. And like one of the things I did was they had Stuart Sutcliffe's original Hofner bass from the Beatles that they got from Klaus Bormann, and it was missing one of the pickups and the pick guard and stuff. And so I made a fake pickup and pick guard for the display and just mounted it on there. And it just, so it was like it was a black pickup. I made one out of ebony and shined it, polished all up, just like that other one, but it was just a dummy pickup.
Oh man.
And so I did stuff like that. And then I was able to work out a deal with them where they would pay me for one of my custom acoustic guitars if I could, like, I would go, they would get me into these concerts, into the backstage in these concerts. And I would negotiate with the artist and say, look, you can get this guitar for free if you give a piece of memorabilia to the Hard Rock Cafe that they can display in their restaurant. And then the Hard Rock would pay me. So it was a nice three-way deal. I got paid, the Hard Rock got what they wanted, the musician got what they wanted, and everybody loved that deal. Man. And that's how I met Carl Perkins and Chris Hillman and Joe Walsh and all these people like that, and Jorma Kaukonen and so, like, for instance, Chris Hillman, I built a guitar for him, and he was in the Flying Burrito Brothers, and at the time he was in the Desert Rose Band, and after he got sober, he started pumping iron and lifting weights, and he got really buff, and he's really muscular and big. And back when he was playing in the Burrito Brothers, he was skinny because he was getting high and partying and stuff, and he was like a thin rock and roller. And so the nudie suit that he wore back then, he couldn't even begin to get in it anymore. So he traded that nudie suit gave that to the Hard Rock Cafe, and I built him this really fancy guitar, which in today my price for a guitar like that'd be like 12 grand. And so they would pay me for that, and it worked out great. And I was able to get good. I built 2 guitars for Joe Walsh. I built for Carl Perkins and James Burton, and like the guitar that James Burton plays in the Roy Orbison famous black and white concert where all the all-stars are backing him up. Anytime there's a slow song, he's playing that acoustic guitar that I built. Yeah.
That's so cool, man.
So,
and then, but then you've also kind of, since you've been doing, Baxendale Conversions and like fixing all these old catalog guitars and stuff, you've had tons of people that haven't you done, did you do work for Nels Klein? Like you actually.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I was seeing if I could turn my volume up. So I've built. Nels Klein's got like 3 of my guitars, I think, and Tweedy's got a couple of them. Okay. And so we were able to when I was in Athens, I was able to start, immediately became friends with all the people in Widespread Panic. And like, there's the drive-by truckers that got me to go to Athens in the first place. But once I got there, I was immediately in cahoots with REM and Widespread Panic and, all these bands that came through. And then somehow we did a couple of things for some Nashville folks, and that kind of opened up some floodgates with Nashville people. Mm-hmm. And it got for up to the pandemic, basically, we were sort of on the have to stop by and see list for these touring bands from Nashville that were playing at the Georgia Theater. And so we were able to hook up with like Brothers Osborne and Steel Wheels and some of these other kind of like more progressive Nashville country bands and stuff. And so that was opened up doors there. And, it was just Athens is a, unique spot, I think, for kind of a crossroads of these different levels of musicians or pro levels of musicians. A lot of people starting out that are just getting going, and they liked our stuff because they could afford what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And we would work trades with those guys if we felt they really were struggling and needed something,
Yeah, that's where wasn't Mayer there for a while? Like when he left Boston, I think he went to Athens. Is Eddie's Attic
briefly
in Athens?
No, that's in Atlanta or outside of Atlanta.
Oh, maybe he was outside Atlanta. Yeah,
but he was from the Atlanta area. But one of my good friends, Tom Ryan, was in that early band with him, played with him.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you do stuff for Jason Isbell too? Like as far as?
Oh, yeah. Man, well, I built him a custom guitar right after he broke off from the Drive-By Truckers. Mm-hmm. And he played that for a while, and then that guitar got stolen, and then it got recovered, and I ended up getting that guitar back in a trade, and then I played it for a couple of years and then resold it after Jason became much more famous, and so I was able to get quite a bit of money for it when I sold it later. So it all
It's
worked
so,
out.
yeah, it's so interesting. So like let's talk about your company too, because I
Okay.
really like, dude, this means so you don't even know how much this means to me. And like even when I first talked to you about it, and you were so kind and you know, spending some time like telling me a little bit about it, but like what is it that makes these old like catalog guitars so interesting and so like, because this thing, it just projects, and it has this warmth and sustain that
Yep.
I've never experienced with any, like it's still going.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I have never experienced an instrument like this. Like when I pulled it out of the box and I tuned it up, I was like blown away. Like my expectations were there because I know you do good work. So I'm like, I
Right.
know it's
Right.
gonna come back. I know it's
Right.
gonna feel good. I know it's gonna sound good. But it blew everything out of the water for me. And you
Sure.
told
Sure.
me on the phone, like, I'm telling you, when you get this back, you're gonna sell your Taylor. And I was like, there's no way. I have a nice 714. It's a good guitar. I'll keep both. And you're like, I'm telling you. And I'm like, all right, we'll see what happens. And then I just sold it Saturday. So like, so tell me, why are these things so special?
Well, first of all, it, it's a couple of things, but one, that particular body shape and size, and we call that the figure eight, and it's 15 inches across. It's really an OM. And later on, Harmony changed that shape to be exactly the same shape as a Martin OM. Like you can lay a, like, like I think that they've switched from the figure eight shape in '53, but I'm not exactly sure of that date. And so around early '50s, they switched from that shape to what is now considered the OM shape, which is more like a triple O Martin body.
Right.
And they're really the same size. They fit in the same case, they're the same width, but there's something about that more rounded shape that I think gives it a little something extra that for some reason. But it's also the combination of Harmony had a perfect proportions in that guitar, I think. Like it's got, like everybody gives Paul Reed Smith the credit for being a genius to come up with a 25-inch scale length.
Mm-hmm.
Harmony made 5 million guitars with a 25-inch scale length before Paul Reed Smith ever picked up a chisel.
Right.
And so, you know, there's no knock against him, but that's been around for a long time. So those have a 25-inch scale length, which is right in between Martin, right in between the Gibson short scale and the Martin scale, which is considered perfect ideal scale. And then the other part of it is the bracing that I do. And
Yeah.
so when I was at Gruen's, we were challenged to figure out why a 1938 D28 sounded better than a 1939 D28. And so we had 6 guys in our shop. One was Matthew Klein, who went on to be like the chief CNC design engineer at Gibson in Nashville,
Mm.
and Kim Walker, who went on to design guitars for Guild and then makes these $20,000 guitars that people line up for. And you know, all these people were working with us. Phil Jones, who worked for Gibson a long time. Anyway, we were trying to figure out why that was, because something happened with Martin after 1938 where the sound started to change. And they eventually, by 45, they eliminated the scallops and the scallop bracing. But between 38 and 45, they were doing some other things before they eliminated scalloping. And so we were trying to figure out why that was, because the pre-38 ones were always the choice ones, the ones that everybody thought sounded the best and did sound the best, and they had a magic that the other ones didn't quite have. So we were trying to figure that out. And so when I was working at Gruen's, at any given time, we had more pre-war Martins in the shop than most people ever see in their whole life. You know, we had dozens of them either being worked on or being resold or whatever.
Right.
And so we took a few apart because we had to fix them. But we took the other ones, and we had this room in there where they they called it the dry room. They kept a dehumidifier in there, and we would keep wood to dry in there. And when we were doing lacquer, we'd let the guitars hang in there to dry and stuff. We'd, if you put a towel on the bottom of the door, it was pitch black in there, and we started putting light bulbs inside the bodies of these guitars, and you could see through the tops like an X-ray.
Whoa.
And I had an epiphany. I just was, all of a sudden I go, okay, the conventional wisdom for a luthier is that it's about the scallops. It's all about the scalloping, and the formula is that if you reduce the mass without reducing the strength, that equals better tone. But the reality of that was, I started looking at the peaks and the scallops and realizing that it was about how the peaks interact with the bridge as the top vibrates. And I was in there looking at these, vibrating these guitars, watching it, and I just had this epiphany about it. And so what happened in 1939 is they started experimenting. Okay, what we consider medium gauge acoustics strings, like on that guitar, which are 13 to 56, or people use 12 to 54 for light gauge. Those were considered super slinkies in 1938 because the only way a dude could get a guitar loud enough to compete with a fiddle or a banjo in 1938 was to put heavier strings on the guitar, because they didn't have any pickups and they didn't have any PAs and they didn't have any knobs to turn to make things louder.
Right.
All they had to do was dig in harder or put heavier strings on. So Martin started getting warranty returns based on that problem. And instead of saying, hey, now stop with the heavy strings or we're going to void the warranty, they just started redesigning the guitar. And so the first thing they did was they moved the scallop down the length of the brace, and it changed this whole relationship between the peaks and the bridge and all that. It became all weird and different. It didn't have the same uniformity that it did before that. And then eventually they eliminated the scallops altogether. Then in the 70s, when they reissued the HD28, and then they started making scallop braces again, every single guitar that Martin's ever produced has, with scallop braces, has a stamp in the back that says use medium or lighter strings only on it. And so anyway, so I started going, okay, the strings are why you changed it, but now that's not an issue. So we go back, and so I started realizing that it's about this proportion of the mass between the peak of the brace and the scallop of the brace, and how those two things interact with the bridge as it's being driven. And once I figured out this formula, I'm able to adapt it to any size guitar. I can make a little mandolin with it this big, or I can make a guitar twice as big as a normal guitar with it, and it still works as long as I maintain this same formula. So I created this formula. And so when it was in Denver, my son came to me, and he was, needing to learn a trade because he had dropped out of school and his other job didn't work out the way he planned. That's when I started tearing apart these harmonies and putting these braces in them. And so the rebuilding thing started out as a teaching tool. I can take this guitar that we bought for $50 or less, or that somebody gave us, and we can take it all apart and put it all back together again. And you're learning how to do a neck reset. You're doing a plane and refret. You're making a bridge. You're doing a saddle. You're doing a nut. You're doing all that geometry stuff that has to do with doing quality repair work and restoration work. And while we're that far, let's just pop the back off and put new braces in it and fix that all up too, and transform it. And so we started doing that, and the guitars started just selling themselves. So we'd just hang them up on the wall. And I think the first one that he did, we sold for like $600 or something. And the guy loved it. He played it he's probably still playing it, And at that time, we were right across the street from the Bluebird Theater in Denver. And so all these bands were coming over all the time, and they started buying them. And so Butch Walker was one of the first guys, and he's been one of the best at promoting us and stuff like that. And because of him, my guitars are on Green Day albums and Avril Lavigne records and Taylor Swift records and stuff like that,
That's so cool, man.
I know, it is cool. And he couldn't be a nicer guy too. He's just so generous and such a sweetheart, and he's in it for all the right reasons.
Oh yeah. He seems like he comes off that way for sure.
Yeah.
What I find interesting about this is the pickup in it sounds freaking amazing too.
Oh,
Like
right.
when I did my review, and it's on my channel if anyone wants to go, I had a mic on it, and then I also had it plugged in, and I was A-Being,
The two.
and yeah, and you know, honestly, like it's there's no controls like I had with the Fishman with the Taylor where I can, you know,
Right.
do everything, but it doesn't need it. Like
I know.
immediately,
Huh.
like EQ wise, it's perfect.
And here's the other secret. Here's the other secret with a pickup like that. If you are on stage and if you substitute a small tube mic preamp, even just like a prosumer like PreSonus $99 tube preamp, if you substitute as that as your direct box, and then I'll have a split that comes off of that. You can run into a guitar amp on stage if you want, but leave that off until your mains and monitors are set. There's some about the tube that takes any quankiness out of a piezo, and it gives us some natural compression, and you'll have the best acoustic sound you've ever heard in a room at a gig.
Okay.
And I have
Don't
like a
tempt
little.
me.
I have a little $99 DBX tube. It's got one tube in it.
Right.
And ART makes one for $50 you can buy at Musician's Friend, and just substitute that for the direct box on stage, and your acoustic stage life will change forever.
Oh my God. Don't tempt me. You know,
Yeah.
I'm a little bit of a sucker for gear. So,
Well,
well, this is so beautiful. And, you know, I can't thank you enough for making this happen. I can't wait to record it. I'm like, I mean, I told you like immediately, I wrote
yeah,
like 5 tunes as soon as I got this.
yeah.
And I'm
Now
just like, at it, get at it.
that's what I love about that body shape. I have this H162 that's a figure 8. This is like a late 40s.
Oh man.
And so this is mahogany sides and back, and this is a spruce top. Your guitar is the only one I've ever done like that had a maple top on it.
That's crazy, huh?
It's got bird's eye maple and maple sides and back. It's all maple.
That's crazy.
And that's only of all the, I think I've rebuilt some like 2,000 guitars. That's the only one I've ever done like that.
And my dad has no clue where he thinks he got this at like a garage sale. And like,
Yeah.
and like my dad said that this was the main guitar that he would sit around and play in the house. I mean, he was just a cowboy chord kind of guy.
Sure.
He wasn't doing anything crazy, but
Sure.
but my dad said that this was his main axe because he has this other knockoff that I have hanging in my stairwell. That it's like what guitar? It's like that the Gibson Mockingbird, not Mockingbird. Is it Mockingbird Gibson? Is that I'm thinking of my
Hummingbird.
Hummingbird. I'm thinking of my 335 from Josh Williams on Mockingbird.
BC Rich made the Mockingbird electric guitar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So he was just like, I never saw him without that guitar when anytime he would pull an instrument out. And I bet you he would be so super pumped if he knew that I was still playing it. And so dude, thank you so much for making that happen.
That was a really cool project. I really enjoyed working on that guitar, and it was so like different than any other ones I did, but it had all the cool things that I really love, you know, the shape and the old style V-neck and all that.
Yeah. I mean, and the frets feel great. Like, you know, everything's money, man. It feels great. And I don't know that pick guard that was on there, man, that thing was trashed.
Yeah. But I had just enough of it to get a template to make a new one that matched it.
Yeah, it looks great, man. It really does. I can't wait. I'm gonna get some press photos done, and that guitar is gonna be in the press photo. So I'm excited about that. But the last thing that I wanted to ask you real quick. Oh, and somebody was asking how long an average conversion takes
to get it back.
Well, yeah, I would say to get it back, or how long does it take you from start to finish when you're working on something?
Well, if I'm just not distracted and not buried with the 50 guitars, I can do 2 in a week usually.
Wow.
You know, that's a good average, is about 2 a week per tech, if they've got the whole process down and all that.
Right.
And we're doing them. Sometimes we do them individually, and sometimes we do them in batches. Right now, we're doing a batch of 10 guitars, and so I'm gonna finish up a couple of those, at least 2 of those this week, and have 2 more of them that I'll be able to finish next week, and I'll be able to keep that going for the next couple weeks. And then, and so I got one of my guys is finally trained to where he can take them apart pretty well. And so he's helping doing that, and they're getting close to where they can do it, but still I'm doing all the final assembly and setup and stuff on them at the moment.
Well, I'm super happy that you worked on this personally. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Jeremy, you showed up late, buddy. You gotta
All
go
right.
back.
Hey, Jeremy.
You gotta rewind and watch that. Kent was saying when you were talking about the bracing, he
there's my buddy Kent. My buddy Kent Hughes is on.
He said all about the bracing. So
yeah, it's all about my bracing. It is a lot about that.
Well,
it is.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, so as far as electric guitar gear, as of right now, show everybody that electric that you have, because it's super cool, first and foremost.
I've had almost every kind of iconic electric guitar in my arsenal over the years. I've owned a Firebird, and I've owned Strats and Tellys. I played a bunch of Strats. I had a 54 Strat and a 59 Strat, and a bunch of Tellys and everything. But about 10 years ago, I started playing this pretty much regular all the time. And this is a Silvertone 1446 model. Some people call this the Chris Isaak model because he actually recorded an album using one. And they were sort of a sleeper guitar until just fairly recently, and now they've kind of exploded in popularity.
Yeah.
But what's unique about it is it's built by Harmony in Chicago, but they only built this model for Sears, so it only says Silvertone on it. And so any guitar that says Silvertone on it is built by Sears, and it could be Silvertone could be made by Harmony or Kay or Dan Electro or Samick or a number of different companies. This was made by Harmony, and they made other models with this same basic body, but these pickups were made by Gibson, and with these trapezoid surround rings, they were only unique to this model.
That's cool.
And and so like I have an H72, which is almost the same guitar, but it has these like gold foil pickups on it. And that guitar is really unique, and I love the sound of the gold foil pickups. But compared to these, those gold foils are like a one-trick pony, and these are the most versatile. I mean, I can play everything from the darkest, deepest kind of skanky whammy barred like Tex-Mex snake music, or I can play like chicken picking country, or I can go warm jazz, or I can go balls to the wall blues rock, anything with this guitar. And I'll show you, if you see this bridge, it's a wooden bridge with a bone saddle on it, but it rocks with a whammy bar. So when you press that, it actually moves, and so the string never loses contact with the point on the saddle, and that's the secret to keep it in tune. Like if you have any bridge, like first thing people do is put a tune-o-matic on this, and that ruins it because it won't stay in tune anymore because the string wants to drag over that saddle and it catches and pulls.
Yeah.
And so the secret for a Bigsby is that the string contacts the saddle and it always stays with it when you push the whammy.
That makes sense.
And so if you do that, then the thing, I mean, I can yank that thing and go crazy with it and feed back and squeal and come back, and it just will stay in tune. I won't have to tune it.
Nice. Yeah. And what is your go-to amp when you're gigging with that?
Mainly it's an Ampeg Gemini 1.
Oh, cool, man.
Yeah, it's been my number one amp since the early 90s, basically. I have a bunch of amps. I have a matchless, and I have Vibrage amps that I use in the studio, and sometimes on little gigs I'll use the Vibrage amp. But I've got Steve Hunter is an amp builder in Athens, and I've got a couple of his amps. He's sort of like the tube guru, and he like does all the work for a lot of Atlanta people and for Widespread Panic and Jimmy Herring and people like that.
Yeah. I love Jimmy.
And so that Gemini 1 is my favorite amp. They have the best reverb and tremolo of any amp. I just recently got an old Reverb Rocket too that I got fixed up, and it's sort of similar but kind of smaller.
Yeah.
And then I have and then my favorite of the kind of the new boutique guys is Nick Greer. I have a couple of his amps and a bunch of his pedals, and I have like a 35 watt amp, And then, but the one I really like is the Mini Chief, which is like a 3 or 4 watt amp that he makes in a little
Yeah, he
wooden
makes some good
case.
stuff. Yep.
And that's kind of like, it's similar to the Vibrochamp in terms of in some ways, except it's a Vibrochamp that's like on 10 times steroids, you know,
Steroids. I
normal
was
stuff,
gonna say.
like steroids times 10, because you can make it scream and it's super loud. And in my recording studio, I've got that universal audio aux box, and I can just record guitar through the headphones, and I switch between those two Greer heads mostly these days in my recording setup.
He makes great stuff. Did you meet him
Yeah.
while in Athens?
Oh, we're like, he's one of my best friends. Yeah, closest friends. We talk on the phone, you know, at least a couple times a month. And
He's
I
great.
got one of his guitars in my shop right now.
Oh, nice. He was
Yeah.
on here.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember if that was this season or last season, but what a good guy. And like he's
He's a
just
really good guy.
so, yeah. And I love the fact that like the whole Lightspeed thing, like how it's just its own vibe. Like, and I love how he's not chasing somebody else's circuit. Like how he's just like making
Right.
something new and fresh always. Like,
Right.
I just really like that about him. I love his
That's
vibe, man.
that's one of the few pedals of his I don't have is the Lightspeed.
Oh, Scott, you gotta get that.
My secret Greer pedal, which he doesn't make anymore, is called the Pork and Beans pedal.
I remember
And
that thing.
yeah, and that's like a mid thing, and you switch one switch, it's the pork, and one's the beans, and it's supposed to be the Beano tone, and apparently Jimmy Page uses 2 of them, and he has one with a switch on the pork and one with a switch on the bean, and he switches between them. But it's all designed to get
Smart.
that. But in my stage rig, I'll have that in front of my tube screamer, and sometimes I'll put both of those on, and it's pretty out there.
Yeah,
You know,
that's awesome.
and yeah.
Nick's great. Well, Scott, I don't want to hold you up all evening. Are you ready to do this lightning round get down?
We can, unless there's some more stuff you want to talk about. I'm in no hurry. I want to show you this other guitar real quick.
Oh yeah. I don't want to take up all your time. Oh yeah. Okay, cool.
So here's the Harmony, the H162, right? And that's my kind of go-to studio guitar that I record with all the time. But I've been building these, and this is built entirely from scratch. And I built this for my granddaughter. She's only 10, but she's kind of a musical prodigy. She's already writing songs and playing and doing videos and singing. She sings really, really good. And so this is made out of Indian rosewood.
Oh yeah.
And mahogany, ebony on the fingerboard and stuff. I don't think my headphones are picking up the guitar sound very well, so unfortunately.
Woo, that thing. Yeah, man. Yeah.
So she wanted me to build her a guitar last year, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, you learn to play Blackbird, and I'll build you a guitar. And then about 2 weeks after she started trying to learn to play Blackbird, she was at a gym with a weight machine, and so the weights smashed her finger. She had to go to the emergency room, and she was in a cast for like 2 months, and her finger's just like now coming back. And so I went ahead and finished it so she can get it before Christmas this year.
Oh man, that's awesome. So did her love of guitar come from you, or like how did that spawn?
Her dad plays guitar, but I think it really came from me, because every time we're together, we do music. And
it's awesome.
We actually played a show together because we wrote a couple songs together. Where I came up with the music and she wrote the lyrics and sang them, and she sings so good. I mean, she's got perfect pitch, and she's fearless on stage. She has no nerves whatsoever.
It's beautiful.
And so I took her to this open stage in Denver the week before everything shut down for the pandemic, and we did our first and only gig. And then everything else, our life has been all upheaved since then, and now we're in Santa Fe and all that. So we haven't had a chance to revisit that now that it's back again. But
so, how hard did your heart explode that night?
Oh yeah, if you go to my YouTube channel, the video's on there, and I show it to everyone.
Oh my God, dude, I can't even imagine. My kid is around her age, and she's now really getting serious about singing, and
oh good.
and stuff. And it's just like you hear her in the shower singing a song that you exposed her to. Like I have
Nice.
her so hard into Dawes right now.
Oh,
Like,
nice.
and so like we listen to Dawes all the time in the car. Like if we're driving, because
Mhm.
my wife is not a musician. She likes music, she appreciates it, but she's
Yeah.
like most of the time when she's driving, she doesn't listen to music. She listens to like books on tape or something.
Sure, sure.
But my kid will be in the back and she'll be like, Dad, can you put Dawes on? I'm like, yes, I can.
Right,
So
right.
it's stuff like that. It's just like, man, it's so crazy, like the lineage, how we
Yeah.
just keep propelling it, man. The love of
Well,
music.
well, my granddaughter Avery, she doesn't realize it, but when she's with me, she's learning Roger Miller and Sam Cooke and stuff like
Oh,
that. Like we're singing King of the Road and yeah, like
that's awesome.
so yeah. But I try to expose her to a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm in love with Wet Leg and the Linda Lindas are bands that I think are amazingly
I don't
good.
know those bands.
Wet Leg is the hottest new band out. Check them out.
All right.
And the Linda Lindas, they're only like 13 years old, and they're out in LA. And they had some little pop punk band that they did in some movie, and now they've like recorded a couple albums and
Right.
yeah. But Wet Leg is happening. They're the biggest new hot band that there is, and they're two girls from England, and they're really clever songwriters, and they're really got this pop punk thing that's really perfect. Yeah.
Okay. I will check it out. You know what's funny, man? When I sent you my guitar, you probably didn't see this, but I put one of my CDs in there for you, and it came back.
It came back because I didn't see it. You have to
Yeah.
send it back to me. I totally messed up on that because usually I try to get that stuff when that
Oh no,
comes to me.
I'll send it. I'll send you a shirt. I'll send you a T-shirt too. You should let
I'll
me know
get
what
you. I'll
it
send
says.
you one of these guys too. And do you listen to vinyl?
Oh my God, yeah.
I'll send you a vinyl too.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll talk after this.
Yeah.
Well, let's do the lightning round because
All right.
I have a kid upstairs who's not feeling well and watching TV till her mom gets
All
home.
right. All right.
All right. So here are the rules. We
Okay.
don't talk about Fight Club. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to ask you 10 questions,
Okay.
rapid fire kind of thing, but you can explain your answers. I love hearing explanations as to why you chose that, but you do not have to. It is not mandatory.
All right.
First question. Usually I ask Lennon or McCartney. So let's do 11. So I'm going to ask you Lennon or McCartney first.
Lennon.
Okay. And the other one that I had here is Rubber Soul or Magical Mystery Tour.
Rubber Soul.
Me too. All right. Apple or pumpkin pie?
Wow, tough. I think pumpkin.
Okay. East Coast or living in the desert?
Living in the desert.
You like it?
Yeah, I love it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's beautiful here.
Nice.
They call it the land of enchantment, and there's a reason, man. It's just the light. It has the most beautiful light and sunsets and sunrises, and the sky is just incredible all the time.
I've heard, man. I've never been out there. We want to go. We're trying to make it out there. All right. For a movie, would you like a good Western or a good sci-fi movie?
Western.
All right. Bob Dylan or Woody Guthrie?
Bob Dylan.
Hot
That's
chocolate.
a tough one. That's kind of a tough one, though. I mean,
It is.
you're kind of voting for the same thing in a way.
Yep.
Yep.
Hot chocolate or coffee?
Well, I don't drink coffee, so hot chocolate.
All right. All right. If you're in the studio, Scott, and you're micing an acoustic, you put a mic. If you can only use one mic, are you going to put it on the sound hole or are you going to put it on the neck?
I'm going to put it on the neck.
My man. All right. In the snowstorm, sled or ski?
Probably sled.
Okay.
My knees are weak.
All right. For a fretboard material, do you want to use rosewood or ebony?
50-50 for me. Mostly I build with ebony, but I play mostly with rosewood, with guitars with rosewood or maple. So
okay. All right. So as somebody who's been around plenty of guitars and different types of wood making guitars, can you end this argument that people say that tone wood does not matter?
Perhaps. Okay. Tone wood colors the sound the same way different microphones color the sound on a singer or a guitar. The soul of a guitar starts and ends with its design. And that's why the bracing, that's why Kent put that up about the bracing, about how your guitar sounds. It starts and ends with design. So I'm taking an almost perfect design and making it perfect with my added perfection to it in terms of the sound. And so in that regard, that's the most important.
Okay.
You know?
All right.
Yeah.
All right. And here's the last one. Sometimes this is the hardest. Sometimes this is the easiest for people.
All right. All right.
If you can take one record, one album by any artist, doesn't matter who it is, but if you could take one record and erase it from your memory, just so you could go back and experience it for the first time again.
Oh man. Okay.
What album would that be?
That's really a tough choice, but just my first album that comes to mind is the first album that I flipped out over when I was a kid, and that's Happy Trails by Quicksilver Messenger Service.
Okay.
What a weird one from out of nowhere too.
Well, yeah, tell me why. I'm curious. I've never
There's
heard
just
that
something
record.
there's something about that side, I think it's side 2, where it starts off with Not Fade Away, Bo Diddley thing. It goes into this really crazy jazzy rock jam. And I was just really wore that first 2 Quicksilver albums out when I was first starting out on guitar.
Okay.
But, you could ask me that in an hour and I'd come up with something entirely different.
I know.
And so can I go back to the other question about the wood again?
Yeah.
So I think that the wood, like I said, it colors the sound, but it all starts with the design. And so, and I've learned that from the Harmony rebuilding more than I ever learned it from building custom guitars. Because when I first did the Harmonies, all we wanted to build were the mahogany ones. We thought all the other birch ones weren't worth messing with. But eventually the demand of the guitars got so much and I ran out of inventory, I started rebuilding the birch ones and realized in many ways, they're just as good. They're just different.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different color of the same tone. And so if I do like a little 3/4 Stella birch guitar versus a Brazilian rosewood guitar, there's going to be way more similarities in the tone than differences because of the design. And the differences are going to be like the same between a ribbon mic and a condenser mic, or a dynamic mic, or like a SM57 versus a Royer or something. Just those are the kind of differences you're going to get similar to that.
Right.
And that's how I relate it.
Yeah. So I think it's so funny because there's such an argument about like how maple and mahogany are not any different and all that stuff. And I'm like, well, it's, every little piece I'm sure makes a difference, no matter from the bridge to the neck to the body, whatever. I'm sure everything plays.
It's like when somebody says, well, if you want a bright guitar, get a maple guitar. And it's like, no, my maple guitar sounds more like my rosewood guitar than my maple guitar sounds like that guy's maple guitar. Do you know what I mean? It's because of the design, because of the design of the instrument. And so it sounds closer. My maple and rosewood guitar sound closer together than that other dude's maple guitar, or his rosewood guitar sound like my guitars,
Right.
And I think that's true. I think that's true across the board.
Yeah. Because I never really heard, honestly, like I guess my ears and that discerning in terms of, I've always liked rosewood fretboards. I just have, like, and that's what I gravitate towards. I had one maple neck on a G&L, and I guess it was a little bit quicker and a little snappy. But I didn't like it. I didn't get along with it. I kind of like the darker vibe. I guess maybe, I don't know, but
I've had lots of maple tellies and maple strats over the years, and most of the guitars I play have a rosewood fingerboard on them, or an ebony. Like my custom guitars usually have ebony fingerboards, so when I play those, I'm playing ebony. And I honestly don't think much about the differences at all. That one gives me something that one doesn't, or one gives me something different. I just feel like it's just a different guitar, and that I'm getting that guitar thing out of it.
Right. Yeah.
So I think people split hairs too much on that kind of stuff.
Yeah. For sure. It's the internet. They do it all the time.
Well, here's what I like to say. Here's what I like to say. It's like, oh yeah, when they start talking about this wood versus that wood or something. Yeah, it's kind of like if you look at your overgrown field and you think, man, I really need to mow that field, and then you walk out into it and you pluck randomly like a half a dozen weeds, and then you come back out into the street and go, look how much better it looks now. And to me, that's some of the the nuance that these people argue over, that's about what they're arguing over, you know.
I know. I think at the end of the day, people forget. I think they just want to argue, and that's what happens. But
That's true. That's true.
well,
Yeah.
Scott, dude, thank you so much. This was such an honor and such a pleasure to
Cool.
talk to you, and thank you for again, making or
Well,
getting me an amazing guitar back in my hands. So
I'm
appreciate
so glad you love the guitar. I mean, that my goal is, like, if I can create a piece of art that makes an artist write other art because of they're inspired by the art I gave them, then to me that's the full circle, and it doesn't have anything to do with the money. And that's always been my goal, and it always will be my goal ultimately, you know.
Checkbox,
Right on.
That's
Can't
how
wait
it
to hear the
goes.
record, man.
Oh man, yeah, it'll be out next year. So I mean, I'll get it to you, man. But I'm gonna get you my last record. We'll talk off the air. But
I'll send you mine, and hopefully by next spring I can start recording a new one too.
cool, man. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media and where your business is located, all that jazz, so they know where to look.
All right. Well, our shop is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it's Baxendale Conversions. It's on 2778 Agua Fria, Unit B9 in Santa Fe, 87507. And then my partner is Sean Lee at Stagel Guitars, and our website is married up with his website now. And yeah, I'm at Baxendale Conversions. I'm also on Instagram at Scott Baxendale Music and Baxendale Conversions on Instagram, and so you can reach me there.
Yeah, definitely do. If you guys are looking, if you have an old guitar like
Yeah.
that, he's the man. That's who you want to send it to.
Yeah.
Big thank you to my buddy BV for moderating the chat today and
Awesome.
sending all these links and everything. But Scott, dude, hang tight for a second, but thank you again
Okay.
so much. And
Thank you. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
yeah, dude. Everybody, take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.